was saying, it's really fantastic to see the government investing in infrastructure like this. I think railways are a fantastic form of transport. They are much more efficient than road, both in terms of costing less per ton moved, but also they're more environmentally friendly than road transport. So it's a great bit of infrastructure. But what's being built at the moment is primarily a set of tracks, a railway track. That's not quite the same as having a complete transport system. So to have a transformational impact, we need not just the railway infrastructure, but a whole ecosystem of transport system around that helps to connect the people and the industries within the sort of catchment area of the railway to this railway to allow more efficient transport across the whole region.
And we'll get into some of those things that you've mentioned there, Andres. I'd like to go to Professor Siti from Universitas Gadjah Mada. Ibu, the population density along the railway line has been rising, as you have found. Can you just give us an outline as to the reasons for this? What is happening with that demographic? Thank you, Ibu, you're on.
Yeah, okay, thank you. Yeah, because like other area in Indonesia, the population always increases, and there are many activities along the railway. So we do hope that more people, the potential of people to use railways in the future will be higher, hopefully. But as Pa Andreas mentioned, that we need to have a connectivity to connect the railway with other transport, like maybe buses. And if people use like motorcycles, they need to have like a park and ride. And then we have to make sure that the ticket is affordable. So yeah, many people live or work along the railway lines, but we need to have more the contribution of the government from Sulawesi and also from the kota and kabupaten to give or to improve the connectivity, and also to have like public transport routes, something like that, because I haven't heard about that. They just said that they will give like license to public transport operators, but we haven't heard about any transport master plan, something like that. Yeah.
And I understand that your team has done a bit of work around the number of people who live along the railway line. You're looking at, what is it, a 5-kilometre radius? Just to be clear on that.
Yeah, I think so, something like that.
Okay, so that'll be some great data that will be collected as well within this research project. Professor Nyoman, to you, with your expertise in supply chains and logistics, is building a rail line enough to generate new ideas about moving goods or creating new industries and supply chains, or does it work more the other way around? I'm just trying to, it's a chicken and egg question.
Yeah, yeah. What we understand from theories that actually transportation demand is a derived demand. It is a result of the economic activity in one side and the demand on the other side. So if there is a cargo and there is a transportation path along that connecting between one point to the other, then the transportation infrastructure will work well. But if it is just building a railways, for example, without developing supply and demand, I think that would not be enough. So I think we have to develop the connection, as well as we have to make sure that we have cargoes that need to be transported along the ways.
Okay, that is obviously the work that you're going to be looking at. And maybe I'll stay with you, Professor Nyoman, because that idea around cargo and what can be transported is one of the things that you're looking at. Can you tell me, we have heard earlier in the policy session that there is room within the master plan for the port development, which will connect with the railway, to build a container yard, for instance, or a place where container trade can be conducted, where goods can be put in containers and moved onto ships, or vice versa, from onto rail or off rail onto port. Do you see that as a feasible plan at this stage? And if you're unsure, perhaps you could explain some of the work you're doing to look at what might actually be useful at that port.
Yes, certainly that would be very much helpful, because then most of the cargoes actually that are transported in South Sulawesi, if we talk about containerized cargo, for example, are connected to the sea finally, or coming from the seaport. So if there is an intermodal terminal that includes the facility like container yard is developed in adjacent of the port, that would be very much helpful. But what I was mentioning about the cargo is that I think in South Sulawesi, we also need to see much development of the manufacturing industry and other industry that will produce cargo. So we are not only facilitating the import flows, but also generating more of the export. Because what we see from the data is that 70% of cargoes going through the port of Makassar is actually in the form of imports, and only 30% is export. So I think there is a homework to develop more cargoes from South Sulawesi that will be going out from the South Sulawesi.
Professor Andreas, this is where I might bring you in, because this is one of your areas of expertise as well, and it's why the team works so well together. You're looking at what is feasible in terms of developing industries around a rail line. Could you perhaps explain, looking at the ability to carry commodities for a start and build new industries, what is your focus on in that area?
Yeah, so maybe just to follow on to this idea from containers. So containers are so efficient because they allow you to easily change mode of transport from ship to rail, rail to truck, because you often still have to do the last mile by truck. And so it's not just sufficient to do this at the port end. You have to have these intermodal exchanges from rail to truck somewhere in these regional areas. And so that's important. And of course, every one of these mode changes, it carries a cost. And that's where it's sometimes challenging for rail to be cost competitive, because it's cheaper while you're on rail, but you pay this extra exchange fee, the extra mode change fee for going first from ship to rail and then again from rail to truck. We have done some work recently in Australia, which shows that it is possible even for this relatively short haul rail to be competitive, but it requires some thinking about where the final demand is. How close is it to the railway line? Of course, if you can co-locate industry with railway stations, that's even more effective. And that's where the cement factories, for example, that are getting connected directly to the railway line in a much better position. But for any other industry that's not directly co-located with a railway station, you then have to think about that last leg.
Yeah, there are several strands to this, aren't there? From what I understand, the railway line will certainly help the cement factories, but what you're still trying to understand is how it could help other industries as well. Is that correct?
that's how I would see it. That the other industries are not currently easily set up. That we already have concentrated industrial precincts or business areas where you could say, here we can simply connect this one area to the runway, and so we have to look at a larger region and see how that connects to the railway. We saw in the panel earlier today that building roads to these railway stations is one of the things that the government's really thinking about. But you need not just a road, you then have to think about the infrastructure for example, moving containers between trucks and trains and so on.
Professor Siti, if I could bring you in here as well, of course, the key to all this is the people who live along the railway line and the businesses that live along the railway line. And I guess part of your job is thinking about what do they need from it? How will it help their businesses grow, for instance? I know that because of coronavirus, it's been a little bit more difficult to get on the ground, but what have you learned so far about the communities and their hopes for what the railway line might bring them?
Yeah, okay, thanks. Yeah, we haven't done much, but we've been thinking that we need to understand what they do every day, and then the origin and destination of like their trips, and also what mode of transport they use every day. And we would like to understand whether shifting to railway transport will be beneficial for them. And as discussed before, that in many countries, the use of railways need subsidies, especially in the urban areas. And it takes a lot of money. And so we need to investigate whether the government has some schemes. Yeah, it's very nice that the government, the central government, has put a lot of effort to build the railways, and so we need the support from the provincial and also the kabupaten and local government also to give what we call it, socialization, something like that. Yeah, to make people understand that railway is better in many things, like in environment, and then also faster, and also in total will reduce the transport costs and also infrastructure costs. But not everybody understands about that. So it's a lot of things to do to make people understand. That is the first. And the second, it's yeah, usually people choose transport modes which is the cheapest. It means maybe fastest, and also the tickets is lowest, but they don't take into account other costs like environmental costs, sometimes even safety costs. So we need to give understanding about this to people. And yeah, we need to investigate, to ask people about their willingness and also their ability, like to pay, and then willingness to pay to use the railways, something like that. So yeah. I think it's still a lot of things to do. Yeah.
Yes, which is why the research is needed. There's so many questions
yeah.
to be answered. Yeah, to make sure that everyone benefits.
Yeah.
Can I perhaps follow up with this? Because I think it's really interesting to think about what Ibrahima has mentioned, that it's the cost, but not just in monetary terms, but also in time, in convenience. Right? And there have been a number of studies around the world that have shown that if you make public transport more convenient, less delays, better connections, then more people will use public transport. Perhaps not entirely surprising. But it shows that while at the moment, on paper at least, this railway line looks like it's very competitive, because at a top speed of 150 kilometers an hour, you can go from one end to the other, theoretically in an hour, which is much faster than you could do this journey by car. It all depends on what is the schedule, how often will the train stop, what happens when you get to the other end and you now need to connect to a bus or something else to your final destination. And so it's, again, the scheduling and the interconnectivity that will drive a lot of these, the value that people get from this railway system in terms of how convenient it is, how quickly they actually get to their final destination.
And that is in fact one of the complications, isn't it, Professor Andreas, that you will have both passenger trains and freight trains running on the same line, and I guess there is a danger there for competing or conflicting demands on that. Is that something else you'll be looking at?
Certainly, and it's the picture from behind me, which is taken from this railway line, shows a lot of it is single track. And so one of the things we've done so far is at least a preliminary investigation of the scheduling capacity on the single track, because obviously you can only have a train going either in one direction or the other, not passing each other in the middle. And so that limits how many trains you can run. And it's complicated by the fact that freight trains are much, much slower than passenger trains, and so also going in the same directions, the faster trains can't overtake, except at the railway stations where you have double track, and that provides a real limitation. And what our preliminary studies indicated is that even if you only have a relatively small number of freight trains, it can have a serious impact on the timeliness of passenger trains, that you have to stop and delay passenger trains in order to work around those freight trains. And so there will be that competition between the freight users of this railway network and the public transport users, and perhaps complicated by the fact that this will not be controlled by a single organization. There will be different companies running different services and competing for this scarce track time resource.
Scarce track time. I like that phrase. That's definitely a tricky one to work with. Professor Nyoman, if we can go to you with your understanding of logistics, how can this be managed? I know that really this railway line is the first of what they hope will be more infrastructure projects in the region, and it will go some way to proving what is possible when you put a rail line down. But can those sorts of challenges be worked with in the initial phase to make people feel confident that a one-track rail line can lead to something better and can move their goods and their people along?
Yeah, that's quite a question that we still need to answer, actually. But for sure, we could say that the passenger will normally go on the daytime, and probably I'm not sure yet if probably we can adjust the schedule. Like for example, the freight will be mainly focused on the night time or early in the morning, and then sometime from 7 to 5 o'clock or to 6 o'clock probably we can focus more on the passenger. So I think this is not yet done, but I think there is a potential to try to slotting the time due to the limitation of the capacity. Then we probably have to segment the time when the passenger should be prioritized and when the freight could move freely. So that could be one of the questions that probably we need to answer in our study.
That's a really good solution, it seems, on the face of it. I hadn't even thought of that. what about seaweed? Now, of course, one of the industries that PEAR is putting attention to is seaweed, and there are high hopes for the industry for South Sulawesi. It's one of the main commodity industries in South Sulawesi. Ibu Siti, I will ask you about the people who work in the seaweed industry, but Professor Pak Nyoman, to you first, do you think seaweed as a commodity has a place in this new rail line system?
Yes, I think so, but we still have to assess the quantity and also the connectivity to the point where the seaweed are produced. When we talk about the rail transportation, it is normally good for high volume and for long distance. But for seaweed, I think we need really to assess the suitability of using the train. But for sure, it has a potential to move seaweed through the railways. But I think it is not yet been studied whether this will be good for rail transportation, or it is better to still use road transport for moving seaweed from the point of origin to the port, for example.
Yeah, and that makes perfect sense when you think about it. And then also links back to your comment around this is where, rather than having a raw commodity, you could think about manufacturing instead, value adding to the goods that are in the region already. And that might make it more financially efficient to move them along. On Professor Andreas, I'll go to you. This is something that you look at as well, is that sort of economic efficiency, I guess. And that is obviously a part of your work.
Absolutely. And so the idea here is that transport is typically seen as an extra cost when you're producing something. And so you're trying to really minimize that. Freight transport is very strongly cost driven, and so it has to be cost competitive. And so when we look at, is rail able to move goods, we're not just looking at, is it physically possible, but is it really economic? And you have to always look at, is it cost competitive with road? And that's where you really have to look at this as an optimization problem. What's the best solution? And that's the kind of approach that we're taking to modeling and understanding this transport system.
Could you perhaps explain to us, and I'll ask everyone this, for you, Andreas, explain to us what work will be done in the field to get that information, to collect that data?
Well, that is difficult, right? We don't necessarily have all of the data available, but we do have a fair bit of data that's about the geographic distribution of, firstly, what the railway network is and some of the road networks, but also where different agricultural goods, for example, are being produced. And so we can get some idea of where the demand is, where the population lives, so where the demand for imports is, so that we can look at this geographic distribution of where flows originate from and where they have to get to, so that we can then look at what is the most cost-effective form of transport for this and what role can rail play in that. And then from that, we can derive what are the extra infrastructure facilities that we might need in terms of road rail connectivity and things like that to make that possible.
Yeah, and I guess what I was thinking about, I didn't mean to put you on the spot, sorry, but I was thinking about the ability to get data now might be limited, but you still have access to some. And in the future, potentially, what you'll be doing is adding to that data pool and proving how important having information is to making these smarter decisions and being able to feed that back to the officials that you're working with, for instance.
Yeah, well, that's definitely true. And in some sense, the difficulty here is we want data for something for the future, for what might be. And a lot of this is kind of chicken and egg, because as you build facilities, then it might change the sort of decisions then companies make about where they establish their industry. And so the demand will change in part in response to the infrastructure that is being provided.
Professor Siti, if I can go to you now, and let's look a little bit more at the work that you've been leading on, and that is around community and people, but also environment, which to me is quite interesting. You would think Indonesia, of course, you have to think about the environmental hazards. Could you tell us a bit about the work you've done so far on events such as flooding and landslides, and what kind of work you are planning to do for the next few years of this project?
Yeah,
it's a big question. Take your time.
yeah, we have done a bit, and then in the future we will continue. Yes, in Indonesia, as you understand, there are many potential disasters because we have a lot of rains, and also the land use along the railway lines might change. So we need to investigate about that. But we have to minimize the risk. So we have to mitigate about that. So we will do it later, because now we just have some identification, but we haven't got the final results yet. Just identification about that. And also we look at the like you asked me before about the density, people density along the rail line. So there are negative and also positive impacts in the future. Yeah.
Have you found that there are particular sections of the planned rail line that are more prone to, say, a landslide or flooding?
I don't think so. Ibu Emma have been doing about that, and what we learned so far, we haven't got that conclusion yet.
But obviously vitally important to go into the planning around mitigation measures and and making people aware, I guess, of the landscape around them. I'd like to go now into the intermodal aspects, and there are so many things around this, and I'll start with you, Professor Siti. You talked earlier around, people have to have access to buses, for instance, and there is a grand vision in Indonesia to create these centres of transit, where people can, as you say, park their bike, their motorbike, and then catch the train. Or if they get to the city of Makassar, are there buses that can take them for their shopping or whatever? How can you explain the work that's being done in this area and the intermodal aspects for passengers, for a start?
Yeah, that is the question that we would like to ask, because we haven't got the complete information about that. But it's nice because the people from the Dinas Perhubungan and also from the government, the Percepatan team, they support this program. So we do hope that the connectivity will be available, because from their presentation this morning, we haven't seen about that, but we do really hope that there's some better connectivity, because as Pa Andreas mentioned before, that it is very important, not only the reduced time, but also better, like people have convenience, and it means that easier to transfer, etc., etc. So it's very, very important. So we need to ask that questions. I haven't got the answer, but yes, certainly we will ask that question to people.
Well, it's the value of the research, isn't it, to get that sort of information?
It's very nice. We've got their master plan about what they're going to do to have a better connectivity in the future, and then like what like some stations, and then yeah, public transport routes, something like that. Yeah.
I think I remember from your preliminary findings of the report, and perhaps Pak Nyoman, this is where you come in as well, that there is a bit of a disconnect between the plans of, say, the city government in Makassar and the plans of the villages along the line. Perhaps you could talk us through that a little bit. You know, how much of a concern is that to the team while they'll be looking at it? And, you know, once you sort of raise this disconnect or this idea there is a better way to work together, do you think that's possible, given we're in the early stages of the rail line?
Yes, our team, one of the associate fellows, is working on the master plan, especially from the perspective of a smart city. So we are in the early stage of trying to collect information on the master plan at the province level as well as at the district levels. And the initial impression is that there is a disconnect between what we intend actually to have at the higher level and what is actually already stated at the master plan of the district level. But we need further details on this. We haven't got enough information to say how much disconnect there is, and whether or not this rail is already somehow in the plan of the district level. But initial impression is that it is not yet there. Then I think it is very important when we talk about, let's say, intermodal exchange, where we need to place some infrastructure like a small warehouse or loading, unloading facilities along the lines. I think it has to be included in the master plan at the district level. So this study is still going on, and we are still collecting more of the information, because not only a single district that we are talking about, but a couple of different districts that are passed along the railways. So I think we need more information and more analysis about this. But for sure, it is very important actually to have it put down in the master plan of each district.
And, you know, the message from the officials in South Sulawesi and the Ministry of Transport and industry groups is that they are keen to see this built in a way that maximizes the benefits to everyone, to communities, to business, to trade. Is that the sense that you're getting, Professor Nyoman?
Now, there was a few workshops that was conducted by our team on the master plan. So that was the first impression. But we also get more information qualitatively from what we have done through our FGD when we were in Makassar last year, for example. So that is collectively providing us information on what I just said. So that was the impression, but I think we need more details to say firmly about what is lagging on the master plan.
Okay. Professor Andreas, I might go to you then. Perhaps you could provide some perspective from the Australian side as to, you know, how you devise something that is intermodal, that is connected, so that the port connects with the railway, connects with the road transport, and those things that are needed to maximize the benefits in terms of freight in this instance. What can you tell us about what has been learnt about that so far?
So I think it's always great to see the Indonesian government is always very good at planning, having 5-year plans, strategic plans, master plans, and so on. But there is always that danger that you have separate organizations doing their own bit of planning for what they have control over, And transport systems, unfortunately, can interconnect a lot of things, affect a lot of different areas. And so you have to have this overarching plan on how the transport system works across all that. As an example, from the Australian side, we have a lot of single track railway systems like this in more mining contexts. And sometimes that is a single mining company that just controls everything, and then it's kind of easy. Sometimes there's a number of mining companies on the same supply chain that have to share this. And then the most effective approach is to have a coordinator that coordinates the shared use of the railway and the shared transport. And so I think something of that nature would be required here to say we need to have some coordination amongst all the different organizations that want to make use of the railway and that want to operate transport systems around that to make that efficient. Right? And that's partly where I think our researchers hopefully going to paint a picture of what might be possible by doing better coordination across these different organizations.
And we have a question in, it's actually come through on my phone, so I'll just read it out. I understand you'll conduct more analysis, but based on your current understanding so far, which areas of planning and investment do you believe would be most impactful to maximise the railway? Keen to get a sense of current hypotheses, if that's possible.
Well, my feeling is that public transport is a really big area. So it's clear that cement is going to benefit a lot from, because it's a lot of it, it's really heavy. It's going to get a straight benefit of being able to transport to the port. And then probably the next biggest area will be public transport. But that requires a lot of planning. And so I think that would be the next biggest area.
Yeah. Professor Siti and Professor Newman, I'll ask you as well. What areas would benefit most from first investment? And Professor Newman, I'll go to you first, and then Professor Siti for a population perspective.
Yeah, I think after the two that Andreas mentioned, cement and passenger, I think there is also a potential to provide benefit to local manufacturing companies, which is not much yet right now. But this is a national issue actually. When we talk about logistics in Indonesia, people are always talking that we move a lot of cargoes from west to east, but very little from east to west. So that creates a big idling capacity when we talk about transportation in Indonesia, and also one of the source of high logistic costs in Indonesia. So I think there need to be a very strong will from the government in eastern part of Indonesia, including in South Sulawesi, to develop manufacturing companies that could adding value to local commodities and then transport it to the western part of Indonesia. That will be very much good for Indonesia as a whole, can be reducing the logistic costs and improving the local economy. So creating something like industrial zone in South Sulawesi that is close to the railways, I think would be one of a good idea in the future.
Well, as we heard from Professor Wahana earlier on, the railway line is being built because of investment, and they're obviously keen, the Indonesian government's keen to improve the manufacturing base, as you say. But you're suggesting that an industrial park, which is a government-led initiative in a way, isn't it, Professor Newman? You think that government needs to give a signal, basically, to private business?
Yes. Because I think if we can have an industrial zone, government normally will provide some facilities like tax waiver at the beginning, and then also infrastructure that is good to start a business or a manufacturing facility, rather than a standalone manufacturing facility which is not connected to any other infrastructure that is needed. So it's very important for the government to initiate this And also, I think one of the problem in eastern part of Indonesia is the sufficiency of the utility like electricity and water. That could be also the responsibility of the government by developing an industrial zone.
Very important point. And to you, Professor Siti, when we're looking at where is investment needed first, or where would it have the most impact, I imagine that things such as electricity and water connections and so forth that help business are also helpful to people who live along that rail line. What are your thoughts about where investment is needed first?
Yeah, in terms of railways, I think railways is very important, and it is good that the government plan to finish them in 2021 or 22, and I think to attract more people and also to attract more money, I think it's very important to develop TOD, the transit oriented development in many stations, so it will create businesses and many zones, and I think it will help the railway business to create some money. And the second one, I think it is also very important that we put some effort to have a very good and strong organization for the regulator and also for operator for the track and then for the station, and also the businesses in the zone. The sometimes we call it the I forgot, that's in the TOD. So it will help to give subsidies. So people will pay less to use the railways, and it is very important to support the sustainable transportation. And I think in sustainable transportation in social and then environmental and also in economics. And I think that is where the government and also the business like the enterprises and also from the people to put some money to that. And because I think it's very, very difficult or maybe almost impossible to operate railways, just railways, but we need to create businesses in the many stations. So I think that we need to create that. To make the railway lines possible, and also to create more people live or work near the stations, and so they just they can walk or cycle inside the TOD, and then they use railways when they move from one zone to another zone. Yeah, I think that's very important.
Thank you very much, Ibu. That's very interesting. I have another question that's come in. This is for Professor Nyoman. Can you please give an example of the relative inefficiency of east to west Indonesia logistics infrastructure and how it might impact South Sulawesi's competitiveness? Professor, would you be able to answer that? That's a big picture question.
Yes. At least from the export-import data from the Port of Makassar, where 70% is in terms of incoming containers and 30% is outgoing containers, that is more or less reflecting the imbalance between the cargoes moving west and east. But this is only for Makassar. Makassar is already a little bit good. I mean, we have some volume there. But when we talk about another eastern part of Indonesia, the problem is even more severe, I think, compared to Makassar. So I think this is a rough idea, where 70-30% is what we actually obtain from the data from the Makassar port.
Right. Okay. And I'll finally just ask for a closing question from all of you. If you could just give an answer of a minute or so. you're obviously, you've had a preliminary report, you've shown up some of the challenges that need to be looked at within developing this railway line so that it benefits everyone. You've got a lot more work ahead of you to answer some of these important questions. What's your sense, though, at this point around how the railway line can be an example of what is possible in a province which, hasn't had this kind of infrastructure before? I guess it's what is the potential for this kind of question? And Professor Andres, you did answer it a bit earlier, but I'd like a further perspective from you. If you're someone who's planning this as a way to inspire and aspire business and people in the region, is this rail line a good start, to say the least?
Yes, so maybe I want to pick up on the sort of comments that Professor Newman and Ibu Alma have made, that we're not hoping to plan a railway here for what's already existing. The really exciting thing is the potential to spawn new industry, new areas, and new things happening that simply don't happen without that. So we're trying to picture what might be possible with an efficient transport system, allowing more people to move further, to access jobs and services, and goods to move more cheaply, bringing in new industry and new businesses to the area.
And Professor Newman, is it exciting for someone like you involved in trade and logistics to have the opportunity to work on a project like this?
Yes, sure. I have been thinking that islands like Sulawesi and probably Sumatra should use more of the railways in transporting passenger as well as freight. But for very, very long time, I think we have neglected the development of the railways. Even in Java, it is not much utilized. Only recently, government has put more attention on the railways. I think it's very exciting if these railways can be utilized very much in the future. That would be very much good news.
Thank you, Professor Newman. And to you, Professor Sethi, with a keen interest on communities and how the railway line can benefit people. We heard about the need to sort of explain the benefits almost of the railway line to people so that they make the most of it. What's your sense at this stage as a project that is an ICOM project? I think ICOM project was one of the phrases used in our earlier discussion with the officials. Do you see it as something that will pave the way for this kind of infrastructure in the region?
Yeah, I think railways in Sulawesi, I think it's very important. As other railway project, at the beginning, it seems very, very expensive. Maybe it's not very interesting for people, but at the end, we do hope that they will understand that railway is the best way to transport for goods and also for people. And I think, yeah, as we understand that because this is the first railway in Sulawesi, so we need to give more effort to promote railways to people, and it's very good. Yeah, we're happy when eventually people use railways and then they realize that yes, that's very good, like what we now experience in Java, that it's very convenient to use railways, and it's the safest transport mode is railways. So yeah, we do hope that it will become reality in the future. We support all the programs that the Ministry of Transport have, and also from the ministry, like from the like many also private like Tonasa, Posua, and also for the people we have to learn more about it. We don't understand much about people at this moment, but we would like to learn more.
But you will, yes.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. And that's where we'll have to leave it. What a fabulous discussion with 3 experts. It's always a pleasure to be able to do that. I would like to thank our panelists today, Professor Siti Malkamah from Universitas Gadjah Mada, Professor Andreas Ernst from Monash University, and Professor Nyoman Pujuwon from the Institute of Technology 10 November. And of course, they are all senior fellows with the Australia-Indonesia Centre, working on the transport project as part of our major research project called PAIR.